Welcome back to Independent.ie. I'm Kevin Doyle, political editor, and I'm joined now by Fionnan Sheahan. Fionnan, you spent a few days in the border region last week. Do you think the people up there will be soothed by the €1.2 billion package that Paschal Donohoe announced today?
No, not massively assuaged by the measures that he outlined today. He's saying it's a €1.2 billion package, but it's unclear when exactly those funds will be released. An awful lot of it seems to be based upon the idea that if something happens down the line that is bad, well, the definition of Brexit in its own right, there in that regard, that funding will be borrowed, funding will be released. There will be immediate funds from day one of Brexit. But in terms of what businesses are going through at the moment, in terms of having to prepare export licenses, set up individual accounts, decide what their tariffs are, and so on, there's an awful lot of administrative burden being put upon them. They're being restrained in terms of the amount of growth and borrowing that they can undertake, because they're worried about the risk and the threats arising from Brexit. So I don't really see that this is going to really help them out in that intervening period when there is such a massive amount of lingering doubt over what's going to happen.
One of the big things he said was that 650 million of that 1.2 billion package he won't borrow if there's a soft Brexit. So effectively, this entire budget is built on a maybe. Is that a wise move?
Well, it's a bit like allowing your neighbour to lump all their firewood into your living room and then wonder if it catches fire, I'll go off and get a bank loan to buy a fire extinguisher. I mean, something bad is going to happen here as a result of Brexit. Either A, you have the current problem where you have the enormous political and economic uncertainty, which is leading to damaging level of consumer confidence. Alternatively, you're going to get an agreed Brexit of some sort, whereby there is going to be obvious disruption to the market, or there's going to be a no-deal Brexit where there's going to be massive disruption to the market. Alternatively, you go down the route of having another British general election, another referendum, and it drags on for another 3 years. All that time, businesses are left wondering, well, do I expand or do I contract? Do I try and move into new markets, or do I hold what I have at the moment? And all of that level of uncertainty is just basically damaging for business.
Well, we're talking budget, but if we flip to Brexit for a second, and given everything that happened with Angela Merkel today and meeting Boris Johnson, all the rumours we've got in The Spectator about the attitude from Downing Street, what's your prediction for what we're going to have in 2.5 weeks' time?
Well, I love watching BBC Newsnight. At the moment, it's replaced Game of Thrones, and Coronation Street as one's favourite soap opera, and every week or so they get a panel of experts to predict what's going to happen over the following 6 weeks, and every 6 weeks they're completely and utterly wrong. I think there is an obvious thing that has to happen here within the next 3 weeks, and that is that something has to happen. Either Britain does exit at the end of October, or there has to be an extension. Either way, I don't really think that there is going to be a positive economic impact for either Ireland or the UK as a result of that. And are we better prepared as a result of today? Maybe we are, in that we seem to have a plan that if something bad happens, we've got contingency funding set aside, or funding that we can access. But it is getting to that point now where this lingering doubt over Brexit is just causing as much damage as Brexit itself.
There's, I think, a sense at this stage that we've talked about a hard Brexit for so long, and no-deal Brexit for so long. We should actually be terrified by what Paschal Donohoe had to say in his budget speech today, and the figures that he laid out for what would be needed for contingencies. But actually, most people will probably look at that budget and go, he's used Brexit to give me nothing. That he's used it as total cover to do away with the fiver in the pension, to do away with the fiver in the tax cut. For most people, there's nothing.
When you look at where we've been over the past decade, and this budget is the 10th anniversary of Brian Lenihan's, the late Brian Lenihan's famous "We've turned the corner and the worst is over" speech, and of course it got an awful lot worse thereafter because the bailout followed in that year. You look at where we were today. He's got a budget package of 3.1 billion euros. That is a massive amount of money to be spending in addition next year, and yet you're looking at it going, but where exactly is the benefit going? I think an awful lot of people will look at it and go, it's not doing a whole lot for me in terms of my back pocket. It's not going to help me necessarily to buy a house. It's not necessarily going to help me in terms of going out there and spending more money and priming the economy that bit more. He seems to have gone down the route of being in a situation where he is getting large amounts of revenues in now from corporation tax and income tax because the economy is booming, and he's basically pumping that back in and spending it. As we learned from our previous experience, if you can't guarantee that those incomes are going to be there in the long run, you shouldn't be spending them on a day-to-day current expenditure basis. And yet he seems to be, his most bizarre aspect of his budget today was where he was congratulating the Department of Health for only overspending half the amount that they overspent by a year ago. And this somehow merited a pat on the back. This is a government that was telling us that they were going to engage in public sector reform, that they'd be very prudent, that fiscal management was at the heart of what they did, so that we wouldn't make the same mistakes that we made a decade to 15 years ago. And yet you've got a Minister for Finance behaving like that today.
Okay, thanks, Fionnan. Stay with us here on independent.ie as we'll have more as we go through the pros and cons of Paschal Donoghue's budget for 2020.